I want to catch up first with the Liberal member for Higgins in Melbourne, Katie Allen. Good to talk to you again, Katie. First up, I don't want to give politicians too much credit for doing the obvious and sensible thing based on one infection, but I'm honestly relieved that the bubble has lasted this infection one day in.
Look, absolutely, Chris. I mean, I think it's fantastic that we are opening up the Trans-Tasman bubble to New Zealand. I think Australians and New Zealanders are very pleased about this. It means that these countries together are working with a common sense approach. And of course, we know there will continue to be spot fire outbreaks from COVID both here and in New Zealand. And it's most important that we don't panic, that we have a process to put those spot fires out, so to speak, and ensure that the countries are working together, keeping the bubble open and making sure both countries remain safe.
Now, Greg Hunt, your fellow Victorian and the Health Minister, of course, for your government, surprised a lot of people, worried a lot of people last week when he said even if we all got vaccinated, then we might not be able to open our international borders. Now, Gladys Berejiklian tackled that logic and she's kept at it. And today, Greg Hunt has said very clearly that the aim would be as quickly and as safely as possible to open up those international borders. Gladys Berejiklian is a strong and sensible voice on this stuff, isn't she? She's now helping to keep your government on track.
Look, I have to say I'm a big advocate for Greg, and I think he's been an enormously important strategist in our response to our COVID outbreak or pandemic last year and now the COVID vaccine rollout this year. So he's a man with a great strategy. He knows what he's talking about. But I think what he's doing is trying to bring down expectations that the COVID vaccine is a silver bullet. We do know that while COVID is raging around the world, we're going to have to continue to deal with COVID outbreaks. And even if you have had the COVID vaccine, there will still be cases, as has happened in New Zealand with that single person who had been vaccinated and still got COVID. So what I'm very interested in is helping the community think about it as we want to take this from being a deadly disease to a serious nuisance disease and hopefully, eventually to eradicate it. But let's not get it too ahead of ourselves. What the most important aspect about the COVID vaccine rollout is to prevent deaths. And that is to make sure that we're keeping our vulnerable safe. And that means particularly the over 70 years. And in this country, those over the age of 70 who developed COVID, about 1 in 10 unfortunately died. So there's a particular age risk and, of course, a comorbid health risk that we have to be careful about. But we need to really make sure that people understand there is going to be the issue of COVID for probably some time to come. Let's work together with the community in an open, transparent way to keep expectations real about how we work to open this country up. We've aggressively suppressed COVID here. That's a fantastic outcome. Now we need to make sure we have a great COVID vaccine rollout to keep our vulnerable safe. And then we work towards opening up our borders as fast and as safely as we can.
Yeah, I think that's important, but I think the public messaging and the government action here, the bias of it is very, very important. And I think what we saw there from Greg Hunt this week, and I agree, everyone in the country would say he's done a good job as Health Minister, but Gladys Berejiklian has helped correct the bias, if you like, the direction of his public messaging. And instead of rather, all on the downside, we've got vaccines and we're still trying to keep this disease out. No, let's be practical. Once we've protected the vulnerable and vaccinated our country, then we have to accept that small element of risk. We have to get on and open up society and get our society functioning properly again.
Well, if you look at the flu virus every year, it has a terrible outcome for some very small group of, the population, and a large amount of people get the vaccination every year, but not everybody gets vaccinated. Now, if we can take COVID and turn it into a disease that is far less deadly, then we're dealing with a completely different scenario. So we want to move it from being, a deadly disease to what was probably going to be a serious nuisance disease. And the more that we vaccine, the more we're going to be able to move to seeing it as less of a deadly threat, which means we can return to our normal opening up of the economy and opening up of our borders internationally. And I think that's the conversation. It's a slightly more subtle conversation, but we need to be aware that the vaccine is going to be absolutely central to returning to our pre-COVID normal life. And we are also going to have to live with COVID probably for the longer term.
I think another problem, though, is one of the reasons people aren't so eager to get the vaccine in Australia is because we're keeping the disease out. so people are thinking they don't have to worry about the vaccine. So that's an issue that is going to need to be tackled, especially if they want to vaccinate everybody under 50 eventually. I just want to get you on another big political issue of the day, Katie, and that is the Prime Minister in the speech last night stressing again that he wants to get to net zero. He just doesn't put that 2050 line on it, although it's very clear that's around the time frame he's talking about. Isn't the coalition, A, threatening Australian economic development, and B, removing a clear policy difference with Labor?
Look, I really back in the Prime Minister's comments. I think he's a man who cares about delivering. So it's about not talking the talk, but walking the walk. And he's doing that, again, in a way that's partnering with the Australian people and partnering with the Australian economy. He understands that the world is in an energy transition. He understands that Australia is going through a transition and opening up renewables. There is, in my view, a technology deficit to get us to where we need to get to. So I think we need a plan about what we are backing in, and there is a plan. There is a low emissions technology statement, which I encourage listeners to go to. It has 5 stretch targets that, in fact, Joe Biden, the US president, has endorsed and embraced himself, because he understands it can't just all be about talk. It's got to be about practical, reasonable action that is sensible and that people understand what the cost is to businesses, manufacturing industry, but also to the broader economy. And the Prime Minister is engaging very firmly in the understanding that the marketplace around the world for energy, but also for other factors that relate to emissions reduction, is changing as we speak. So that transition is not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in a year or two. It is going to take a number of years to get us to that next stage, but we need to start now in order to get there. And I think a practical, reasonable approach is the one that the Prime Minister is taking. There's billions of dollars being invested in new technology as we speak, and I've been a big advocate that the technology response is where we need to go, and that the federal government does well to invest in helping those technologies get off the ground, but then we need to allow the free market to open up the markets in a competitive way to make sure that those technologies get to the consumers, get to the businesses, get to the manufacturing industries that require them, so that they can have cheap, affordable and reliable energy. So there are a lot of components, a lot of working parts in this transition. Energy is one of the critical functions of our economy. And if we don't get energy right, then that's going to hurt our economy, it's going to hurt jobs, it's going to hurt industries, manufacturing and businesses. So every Australian will want us to get this right. And I really back in the Prime Minister that he gets it's not about talking the talk, it's about walking the walk.
Thanks for joining us again, Katie. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Chris.
Katie Allen, the member for Higgins in Victoria, the Liberal member for Higgins. She's right, there's a technology deficit, although if you want emissions-free, reliable, dispatchable energy in this world, there is a technology available. It's called nuclear, but this country so far won't allow it. It's against the law to even consider nuclear energy. Never mind the fact that we supply nuclear energy through our uranium to France, Taiwan, elsewhere.